Now remember, in the tablets, so the Sumerian king list, and Eridu Genesis, and Myth of Adapa, and Instructions of Shuruppak, I could go on and on. They all talk about how Eridu is part of 5 cities created, right? There's 5. 5 original cities are created in the ancient world, the very beginning, where civilization started. Eridu was the first. The last one was called Shuruppak.
We haven't talked about that yet, right?
No. Okay. Shuruppak is where this entire thing is about to go in terms of the story, okay? Shuruppak, in some ways, is as important as Eridu. Now, in having said that, they discovered Shuruppak in 1931. So another myth all of a sudden became a reality. These places that weren't supposed to be real, that were like a myth, all of a sudden became a real place on the ground. And so they started excavating Shuruppak in 19...
How do you spell Shuruppak?
Yep, it's Shuruppak.
Okay, so they start excavating Shuruppak in
1931.
Okay. All right, keep going.
Okay. So they started excavating in 1931, and there was, during the excavations, they did some interesting things. Again, they're trying to prove that these things in the tablets, if they could be true, if there's any merit to them at all. And again, this was sort of like curiosity for them at this point. I think it's because when they actually started to find them, then the control system really came into place. Because when they originally went to Eridu, they seemed like they really were like genuinely wanted to know if it was real, which is what that 1946 to 48 little parade thing was they did there, okay?
There's an ant on there. You can flick them. There you go.
So they find Shuruppak in 1931, and I'm going to pass this over to you, and I want you to see how deep they had to go.
And you're going to give me this digital file so I can put this on the screen right now.
Yep.
Okay.
They dig down, and
holy shit.
So what they found that was bizarre to them is that originally they didn't believe in the flood story. So they didn't really believe that there was an ancient city that had been destroyed from a flood. That's the whole point of this, is that we're taking myth and turning it into reality, and it's leading to an untold story. So they excavate down, they get 45 feet down, 45 feet, and they finally find the ruins of Shuruppak. You imagine how much soil that is? Debris?
Do they have any concept of how deep it really goes?
Well, but I don't know that, but that's not the point. The point was they then backtracked, like they did at Göbekli Tepe, and they analyzed the 45 feet in between the ruins of Shuruppak, deep underground, whatever, and they analyzed this 45 feet above it. They found no human remains, and they found no human evidence at all.
What the
So they're like, wait. So this flood couldn't have been real. It must have just been like a little regional thing. But then they expected to find other evidence of civilizations that had cohabited and lived there. They found none.
Did they have any concept while they were doing this of approximately how old some of the other things they were?
No, because they're still working off the timeline of thinking that it's like 5,000 years old.
And they're not doing like carbon dating and shit.
No, well, they can't. It's too old for that.
Yeah.
So they find yet another city, and this time, though, it's buried by so much sediment that it gives complete evidence to the deluge of being this massive amount of like mud and debris that was like laid down in this region, which is why they never rebuilt or lived in any of them again. Now, that's not the same as everywhere else in the world. As we're going to see in some other incredible ruins, other cultures decided to build on top. But for the reasons of how catastrophic this flood was in that region, it was buried under so much debris that the people that came later didn't even know it existed.
Wow.
Okay, so this is what got me, and then I started to like sort of blow my mind, because I was like, how old is Shuruppak? Right? I found my answer in the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is how you have to do this. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I love telling this story because it's one of my favorites. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the part that nobody's ever read is this part where Gilgamesh goes on this journey, and he's trying to seek out immortality. And and I want anyone to go read it. Like, don't take any of my word for it. Go verify everything I'm saying. But in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh is supposed to be a tyrant king of the city of Uruk, which they then end up finding Uruk. Okay? But it's from a different time period. Gilgamesh is not from the same time period as Shuruppak. And we find that out later. Because what happens is, but Gilgamesh is ancient. That's the thing. He's already an ancient king, but he's from that 6,000 year timeline window. Okay? He's from a different time period. And we know that because of this. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, he goes on this journey to seek immortality, and it shows this symbolism of like going across. You remember that? You know how they show like that boatmaster down in a cave under. You know that I show scenes in some movies and some depictions where there's like an ancient boatmaster who's like a skeleton sometimes, and he crosses over the lake and he picks you up.
Yeah.
That's from this.
Oh.
It's from the Epic of Gilgamesh.
With the crane,
the
looking,
boatman.
Yeah.
He's the boatman between realms.
Dun, dun, dun.
We're gonna get like down to that hole again, where like them creating different realms of reality here. Gilgamesh has to cross into the underworld, and this boatman takes him. Okay? When he gets there, he goes to meet the last king of Shuruppak, the figure that became Noah. His name is Untandapishtim, or in the Epic of Gilgamesh, his name is Ziusudra. These guys often had different names during different time periods in history.
But then they get crossed over into different religious texts, so to speak.
Yes. So he goes there.
That makes sense, actually.
He goes there to seek. I'm gonna keep referring to him. It's hard because I want to say Noah because everybody knows what I'm saying. But the story of Noah, in terms of like the biblical story, became like a ridiculous story that's very silly.
Russell Crowe did a good job, though.
Okay, it had nothing about bringing two of every animal or anything like that. That's not true.
Damn it!
That's
Come on, Matt.
none of that's in there.
You're ruining it for me.
Well, and we won't get into that yet, but I just want to say that. So Gilgamesh goes and he meets that ancient king. He meets his Untandapishtim Ziusudra. He meets him.
Which one was that again?
That's the Noah figure. That's the last king of Shuruppak. I got to try to think of the right term to use because I'm like throwing them all out there. Let's just, for the rest of the show, let's just use the Epic of Gilgamesh name and call him Ziusudra. Okay.
Ziusudra.
Just I don't want to keep saying all these names to confuse people.
It's all right.
Okay.
That's good.
So Ziusudra is supposed to be an ancient king. I mean, more ancient than any of the others that we're talking about. He's supposed to be a king that's from what they call the Old World. The Old World is when these in the tablets describe this, is when the first 5 cities were created here. That's the Old World. That's it. That's all that was there. And then this disaster comes through and like wipes them all out. Then they had to like restart over again and then create things in different places. That's where this is going. But the point is that Gilgamesh meets with Ziusudra, who's the last king of Shuruppak before these events occur. And he's no longer in this realm anymore. Okay? He says to him, Gilgamesh, you come to me to seek the secrets of immortality. I wish to tell you a story so ancient that it's long before you. In the city of Shuruppak, he basically says where I lived. He says, I love how he says this. He says, Shuruppak was a city so ancient to you that you know nothing of it. It's like mind-blowing, right? We're talking about something so old that it's before what we even think of as ancient. And he said, the city was old. He said, and the gods once were in it and walked in it. That's what he says. He says the gods walked in it and were in the city like among men. Again,
could this be some sort of?
I know what you're saying, but if you read the tablets, they talk about how they ended up leaving and not coming back to our realm and like leaving it to us. Mm-hmm. That's what they say. They no longer like came back anymore, really. Mm-hmm. And then we just sort of became kind of chaotic. But he says, and he talks about how that city was far more ancient to him. And then he mentions how Etana was there. Now, I know this might not mean anything to you, but if we're trying to figure out when things happened and how we place things, you'll learn if we go back that there was a legend of Etana, which is a tablet that talked about how there's an ancient king of Etana who was the first king after these cities had been destroyed in a great catastrophe and they had to rebuild the new world. Etana was supposed to be the first king of the new world from a city called Kish. But when Gilgamesh goes, Etana's already dead. Etana's already is a ghost. He says the ghost of Etana. So what I'm trying to say is we now can like lay this all out. We know that Shuruppak was part of the first cities ever created. Then we know that Etana ruled at another time period when civilization tried to reemerge again. And then we know that Gilgamesh came far after that. So, see what I'm saying here?
Yes.
Now we're like putting the whole thing together. And the tablets are revealing their secrets if we know where to look. Okay? So, the question is, what happened to Ziusudra? And I had gotten to that point and I was stuck. I was stuck for years. I didn't know where else to go. I laid that whole thing out.
How fast did you get to that point?
That took me like 5 years.
Okay.
But I was at because I had to read every tablet and then cross-reference every single one with every place and every king mentioned, and then try to list them all based on when they lived, based on tiny little clues of who they met along the way and different things, right? But I was stuck. I will admit to people listening to this, I was like stuck. I'm like, I don't understand how does that connect to Atlantis? How does that connect to the megaliths of Peru? How does that connect to the pyramids of Egypt? Like, how does any of this connect? And I feel like in our community, we've been stuck there for a long time, not understanding how any of it connects.
Or we never got there.
Well, no, we didn't until now. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Now let's change history, my friend.
Let's do it. I'm here for it.
So this fell into my lap by some very interesting means, I will say. I don't know how it happened. It just did. I became aware of a site called Zernaki Tepe. And Zernaki Tepe is in eastern Turkey, not that close to Göbekli Tepe. Quite a ways away.
How do you spell it?
Zernaki.
And then Tepe.
Yep. So Tepe just means mountain or hill. Yep. So these are all just different names for that.
Zernaki Tepe, Turkey. I'm going to pull up the map.
Thank you.
We have that. We'll put that in the middle.
Yeah. And that's actually awesome. I want you to click that right there.
Picture.
That mountain, you see the ancient terraces? That entire mountain is a lost civilization.
Underneath it.
They've only excavated 1% of that entire area. Excavations of Zernaki Tepe.
When was this found?
Zernaki Tepe has only been discovered and started to be excavated since 2014. We are
Who found it?
I don't know the name of the person, but I think it was Istanbul University out of Turkey.
No
But they have no idea what it is. They're labeling it as the Eurasian civilization, which in a very similar way to something like the Hittites, were only a later iteration of another culture that came later and built on top of it. Okay?
Okay.
So, this is how basically the whole thing started, is that I became very curious of Zernaki Tepe because of one thing in particular. If you want to click this.
Yeah, I have it open on this other tab right here. I'll put this in the
Or if you want to zoom in on the maps, you can just see where we are.
Let's start with the picture you have. Because I pulled the map up. I probably have already had that on the screen in the post edit.
So there's a lake in eastern Turkey called Lake Van, and it's an absolutely incredible lake. It's one of the most high elevation lakes in the world. In fact, it's very similar to Lake Titicaca, which, if people are familiar with the incredible Tiwanaku civilization at the southern flanks of Lake Titicaca, it's another one of these lost civilizations that's got advanced technology that we don't understand where they came from or who they are.
Lake Titicaca is in which country?
Lake Titicaca spans the border of Bolivia and Peru, and it's the highest navigable lake in the world. Okay? Now, in eastern Turkey is one of the other largest high elevation lakes in the world called Lake Van. No small lake. It is 1,500 feet deep.
A lake.
A lake. Okay?
Christ, what's down
there? It's like
there?
an entrance into the
Monster?
underworld, right? Lake Titicaca is the same thing. Lake Titicaca is over 1,000 feet deep. There seems to be an interest in these like ancient lakes. That's all I can say.
I didn't even know lakes could get that deep.
With volcanoes around them. Now, okay.
Dun, dun, dun.
So I want you to, can you go down? I wanted to click an image on this. Scroll down. Keep going. Right there.
This one.
Right there. Click that.
All right, hold on.
Okay.
I'm going to open this in a new the number of tabs I have is...
One of the things that I've been studying for about 6 years straight, and I worked with some of the greatest in the field. I'd say the greatest megalithic expert in terms of studying the architecture of megaliths would be Brian Forrester and then Ben from Uncharted X that we talked about before.
Yeah, that's Danny's boy.
They are...
By the way, for people out there, if you haven't seen the Concrete podcast with Ben Van Kerkwyk, which was the first
thank you, Ben
one,
Van Kerkwyk.
Incredible.
So Ben Ben and Brian and me, we're sort of like we focus on studying the architecture of these incredible megaliths left behind from we team and others like Graham Hancock do, the lost civilizations of Earth. Okay, now when you look at the type of architecture and sophistication of blocks in parts of Egypt, like the Valley Temple, the King's Chamber, and the Great Pyramid of Giza, or in parts of like the Concha around Cusco, Peru, and Machu Picchu, we find evidence of this building technique that is incredibly advanced, using very, very hard rocks in a way where we have no idea how they did it. Ben talks about this a lot in Egypt, how we find saw marks and drill holes in places like Abu Sir and other areas where the tools that they created, not only do we not have never found a single tool, but we have no idea how they did it. Because we know that something like Bronze Age tools from the time period we're told would be too soft to manipulate any of these stones or the level of precision that they are, okay? I want to lay that foundation down. Yeah. So once you know what to look for, you essentially see it all around the world. Not everywhere, but you'll see it in a lot of different ancient parts of the world, like Peru, Bolivia. You see it in some parts of Mexico, like Mitla. You'll see it in like around the Valley Temple and the Great Pyramids of Giza. You see it throughout some parts of Turkey that we haven't talked about, like San Simeon. And you see it in megaliths in parts of Greece. Anyway, there are megaliths in these aspects of these civilizations that are all around the world. And I became very fixated on focusing on what they look like and looking for the telltale evidence of them, okay? That basically became one of the only things we have left, is the whole point I'm trying to make. It's one of the only things we have left to prove that those sophisticated civilizations were there. Because when we're talking about some of the stonework that they did, some of the tight fits we're gonna see in Turkey as well as Egypt, places like in Japan, places like in Peru, I don't believe that we could create what they did today. I really don't think we could.
On July 17th, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 took off from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. Less than 3 hours later, the flight had disappeared. Soon thereafter, a debris field was spotted in eastern Ukraine. All 298 people on board were dead. Now, in some ways, you might think this crash was just a tragic accident, but the timing of when it happened and where it happened was not random. You may remember that this was months after Russia had forcibly annexed the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine, and also when the war in the Donbass, the eastern region of Ukraine, was well underway, which is something we know all too well about today. So, in the days, weeks, and months after the disaster, finger-pointing was abound. Back in America, former NASA scientist Harleen Carr was trying to follow the news on the ground to figure out what the hell had happened. See, after Harleen had left NASA, she was at a company that had built the engines that were on this very jet. So, of course, she had a reason to want to figure out if it had been something wrong with the engines. To her frustration, though, misinformation was flying around left and right. Whether it was false narratives or conflicting reports, no one could figure out what the hell was going on. If you remember this story, it was pretty wild. But it was at this moment that Harleen decided she needed to do something about it. So fast forward to 2023, and her company Ground News is now 5 years old. Guys, the link for this is in the description below, and you are going to want to check it out. Why? Let me explain. What this website does is it pulls news stories from around the internet and uses a proprietary data scanner to assign a numerical value of what their political leaning is. In English, it essentially bakes in the bias for you so that you know exactly what you're reading. And the site also does all kinds of other things with this information, including having a section that shows all the stories that the left and right are ignoring, respectively, for that day. So guys, I want you to check out my personal link in the description below and sign up for the site. It is ground.news/Julian Dorey. And I say this not just because it quite literally supports the show, but because you're going to love this tool. Now click that link below and let me know what you think.
Take, for instance, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's 2.5 million stone blocks that average between 8 and 15 tons each. We're told that was built with slave labor, but even if that was true, they would have had to lay like 100 to 150 a day.
I'm really afraid to go into this because I don't want to get you off track.
I know. Totally.
Let's bring it back to that again. I want to ask you a lot about this, so can we come back to pyramids so that we don't lose the other one?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The point is there that these archetypes and architects were so far beyond us that they were doing things that we don't understand today. connecting to the cosmos, using tools and potential materials. Like, just as an example, just to throw out there, but the granite blocks that are in the King's Chamber, some of them are over 20 to 30 tons above the King's Chamber. That's made with a type of rose granite, and Ben's talked about this type of rose granite that only comes from 500 miles away. 500 miles away, that granite we know came from a certain quarry in Aswan. Okay? Which means that they were very specific with the type of stone that they wanted to use for these. It had nothing to do with just grabbing whatever was lying around. So there's energetic properties, and so they could withstand time. Various reasons they did this. Now, here's was another bizarre thing to prove Turkey was connected to Egypt. In Karnak, there's a famous travertine block. It's a type of material called travertine. It's extremely hard. Beautiful, though. It's this huge block of travertine that's sitting there. And travertine's not found in Egypt. Not found in Africa.
Was it ever?
No.
How do we know that?
Because the nearest deposits of travertine is a very rare type of rock.
Yeah, I don't know shit about it.
The nearest deposits of travertine are in Turkey.
But could it have been?
No, because there's always remnants of deposits left. You can't just exhaust an entire deposit. It just means it's not economical to mine anymore. I'm actually a miner, someone that likes to prospect in gold. And so it's like there would be evidence of those elements existing somewhere, and they're never been documented there. Meaning that they carried a multi-ton block, or moved, I should say. I shouldn't say carried. I should say moved. A multi-ton block over 1,000 miles. So you want to say 500. You want to say 500 for Aswan in Egypt. How about 1,000 for Karnak? So the ancient world, they didn't do anything like we think they would do. They were like on a completely different level.
What you're saying is they had capabilities that we can't process.
Exactly. So let's go find where that story goes and how it connects to Atlantis and the ancient Athenians, okay? So in the image you have of Zernaki Tepe that you had up a second ago, the type of megalithic blocks they're uncovering there shouldn't be there. They should not be there. That type of sophistication is something we only see in like Egypt and in Peru. It's very, very interesting because it seems to come out of nowhere in a region that has nothing around it relative to that.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why in a second. There's a whole explanation for how this emerged out of nowhere in this region. So Zernaki Tepe was the first thing that triggered me to something going on. I've been studying Zernaki Tepe for 6 to 8 months now. But it was the only...
This is relatively new.
Oh, yeah. This is all super, super new. But the foundation had been laid for this to all happen, right?
Yeah.
So I become aware of Zernaki Tepe, and I was like, what is this? Because they found an ancient king list at Zernaki Tepe that was written in cuneiform and had connections all the way back to Sumer. And the whole thing was getting kind of bizarre because that's quite a ways from that region up there. It's in far eastern Turkey near Mount Ararat. I want people to remember Mount Ararat. So I'm scoping out Zernaki Tepe, putting a lot of stuff together. I was going to do like a whole workshop on it until I realized it was only one tiny little part of something much greater. And that came when I discovered 2 other major sites that are just being uncovered now. And I mean just being uncovered. One of them, called Kerkwyk, was just found in 2017. Okay?
These are, as far as excavation goes, this is brand fucking new.
That's why I'm saying that's why this is so exciting.
But you know what's good? And maybe this is totally like, way too innocent on my end because I'm not in this world. But they're being found. Places. Yes. What was the first one you said? University of Istanbul founded and whatever. So there's places that aren't necessarily like Oxford or something like that that you think, ooh, maybe it's Masters of the Universe. And people are looking and people are finding and they're being announced. They're not being covered up at this point.
Announced is interesting because I don't really know anyone that knows about these. Now,
well, how did you find out about it again?
Just randomly. I was looking.
Define randomly.
I would say that I think one day I was looking at Megaliths and some picture of Zernaki Tepe of the blocks there popped up, and I immediately identified it as being, what is that? And then a long story short, stumbled upon the fact that it was a new site that had just been uncovered.
Have you talked to anyone who's been on the site?
Ben hasn't been there yet, but he knows about it. I talked to him last time I spoke with him.
And has he talked to someone who's been on the site?
No, his answer was that there's a lot of incredible sites that are being uncovered in Turkey right now.
Well, that narrows it down. Okay.
Okay, so...
All right, continue.
Yeah, so I start really looking into everything I can on Zernaki Tepe. The level of sophistication there is just... It shouldn't be there, is what I'm saying. And the fact that there's ancient king lists that mimic Sumer got my attention. And so, but I kind of sat there with it. I didn't know what to do with it. I wanted to just talk about the megaliths and talk about how it's a basic mountain over the lake. It's very cool, actually. Do you want to go to the map really quick?
Sure.
The actual map.
You tell me, sire, I shall do. The Google map.
No, you were just on it, but you can do it again.
Well, let me open up a new one because there's some of these images I'm going to forget, though, because it resets. Like, the number of tabs I have for this episode right now are fucking insane.
Again, and for the purposes of this, let's just leave the lake. So Lake Von. I just type in Lake Von.
How do you spell
VAN?
Oh, that's easy. Lake Von, Turkey.
Yeah.
There it is.
Okay, so
it's not a Turkish ass name. I got.
All right, so put on that for a minute. Terrain.
Like that.
Hold your mouse over.
Oh, I see. Oh, there's choices.
Yeah.
Wait, why?
You hold it over it and then you click it.
Terrain.
Okay. All right.
Oh,
so,
shit. Look at that.
Mount Ararat is right there. Mount Ararat is less than 100 miles away, and that's an important point I want to bring up because that's the key between this. Now, so here's Lake Von. In Lake Von, Zernaki Tepe is located at the northern end of the lake, and I had initially not known anything else was there. Nor did really anybody else, I think, to be honest. It wasn't until I started studying the lake. I could not get past it. This is what I stay up at night with, by the way. If people want to know what keeps me up and why I can't sleep, it was Lake Von and Zernaki Tepe.
Couldn't have guessed that, Matt.
And so I'm just sitting there, kept up at night. I'm like, how does this one isolated site have this kind of sophistication and be connected to Sumer and have nothing else? It didn't make sense to me. So I went on old maps and Google terrain, and I just literally searched the entire lake. I went around, zoomed in, and went to every part of the lake looking at images, and then 2 places popped up that turns out related that they don't know are related. And that's what got so exciting about this, is that the first place I want to mention, and I'm going to save the last one for last. Okay. The first one that is just absolutely incredible is called Çavuştepe. Cavus. Ironically, there were many people online that shared images. You'll find this funny. That shared images of Çavuştepe recently in the last month or two that didn't know they were Çavuştepe and thought they were Peru. And they were using it as an example to say, look, this is the best sophistication of any megalith in the world. This is from Peru. Not knowing it wasn't Peru. It was Çavuştepe, Turkey, and part of this unknown civilization they didn't know.
All the way across the world.
Yes.
God.
So when I discovered Çavuştepe, that's when I knew. And then there was another one after that brought the whole thing home. But what you have at Çavuştepe is, and that's the image I had handed you to.
Yeah.
Is that Çavuştepe?
Well, this was Sharupa.
Yeah. Do you have yours really quick? It's on the. They're double sided here.
This one over here.
Yeah. Hand me back that for a second.
Okay. This says excavations of Sharupak.
Hold on to that one in your hand. Right. That's it right there.
Okay. This is the one
from
earlier.
It right there.
I will put this in the corner of the screen, and you're going to send me the digital file. Now,
and I want to talk about this while you're looking at it because I think it'd be good. Do you see how there's stones that look like the dark stones in the top left of that structure right here? See these?
Yeah.
That's the Eurasian civilization. Now, notice they didn't build out of the same stone.
Well,
you see that?
Yeah, they look different than
because the other one's limestone. Limestone is one of the softest stones in the world. It's easily manipulated. The stone below it is basalt. And basalt is, if not the hardest, one of the hardest on Earth.
So it's above it and below it, right here in this lake.
And I'm going to tell you why that is in a second, which is very unusual. We actually don't have any other sites in the world where we have young stuff underneath. And I'll tell you why in a second. So those blocks are, and I am telling you this as someone, and Brian would echo this, and I'm sure Ben would, but that's among the finest, if not the finest, stone masonry in the world, right there at Çavuştepe. It looks almost identical to the Valley Temple in Egypt in the way that the stones are fitted. And it also looks pretty similar to some parts of Peru. with the type of stone fitting. Although I will say, and we're going to get into this in a second, the nature of the building in Peru is a little bit more organic, and it actually looks more similar to Zernaki Tepe, whereas the building in Çavuştepe looks like Egypt, which when you find out, you'll find there are two different people, and they went different directions in the world. But what the point I'm going to make, and we're going to get to in a second, is that this was the starting point of an entire new civilization that became the most advanced civilization in our planet's history. Starting here.
Now,
and I call it the Ararat civilization.
How long ago did you come to that conclusion?
About a month and a half ago.
And what,
or less,
outside of tying these together?
And I've been trying to get this before someone else does.
Outside of, and now we got it on the record, outside of tying some of the rock to like Peru and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, we got a lot more. That's only scratching the surface.
I have other questions here, but I want you to continue. I don't
totally understand. And what we're going to do is we're going to provide so much evidence by the time I'm done, you are going to have a hard time refuting this. And I want you to try. Try
me.
Okay. So the first thing that was strange to me was that we saw the same architecture here as we see in Egypt. And not only that, but there was a king's list found at Çavuştepe that mentioned that it was ruled by a king named King Hayk. And you can, if you go look up King Hayk on Wikipedia, you can find him right now. Hayk.
Oh, I fucked that up. I'm American. We don't know how to spell. All right, I'll bring it over here.
There he is. There he is. Now,
the Robin Hood motherfucker?
Not really Robin Hood, but scroll down. Right there. Stay on that.
Wait, where's this king from?
He's the king of Çavuştepe.
See, I don't picture the kings of this part of the world looking like... Okay. All right. Go ahead.
He's like that's how he's depicted.
Yeah, he looks like... Okay.
So, just on Wikipedia, like you don't even have to have me say it, but scroll back to that genealogy chart. Go back down.
Right there.
It said, I was like, I almost had a little mini heart attack. I almost had a little mini heart attack.
Oh, shit. Is this what I think it is?
Yeah.
Go.
The bloodline, he is a direct descendant of Japheth, who is literally a son of Ziusudra.
Noah.
Yes. I was like, oh my God. Now, we got to pause there for a second because we got to fill in the story because people have no idea why that's so significant. In the Atra-Hasis, again, I'm not talking anything biblical. In the Atra-Hasis, remember, Ziusudra, Untapishtim, is the son of the last king of Shuruppak. He's a great bloodline ruler king. Yeah. In the story, in the Atra-Hasis, as well as the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's a great destruction event that occurs on Earth that the gods supposedly created. They wanted to wipe out everyone here. Seriously.
Take two of every kind, get on a fucking boat.
Well, no.
I know.
Yes.
I'm kidding.
So what happened was...
That's just how they changed it.
Ziusudra is this great king that ends up becoming secretly warned. That's the thing, is that the Anuna supposedly made a pact in the tablets that they're not supposed to tell anyone that this event's coming. They literally wanted to wipe out humanity. I'm not joking. It says that. So they created an event to like destroy us.
Quick question. How reliable is this genealogy?
I didn't think it was reliable because I wasn't I'm not a biblical, I'm not a religious person. I don't follow that, but I ended up realizing that there were some aspects of it that I needed to pay attention to.
So if he's 1, 2, 3, he's fourth generation from Noah, Ziusudra, same person.
So
if hypothetically, hold on.
Yeah.
Now we know the two of every kind.
So it means he's even ancient for his time.
Right, but we know the two of every kind thing. That story got fucked up. But if like Noah, Ziusudra were, due to forces of happening on the planet, godlike whatever, were one of the few humans alive at that point, this person, Hayk, is only the fourth generation, which means we have a very depopulated planet at the time of his quote-unquote reign.
But I think they were having sex with people that survived too. I'm not.
So they're massively reproducing.
There was definitely other groups of people, but they weren't on that level. They weren't like him. They were just like, they were groups of people that had survived the catastrophe and probably didn't even remember their heritage and were like living in isolated places. And like had come out, and they described the world as being in chaos. And they had to bring order to the world after that event. That's why Enki and the World Order is called that. They created domains so they could bring the world back.
Continue, sir.
So, in the Atra-Hasis story, and this is, again, it's echoed by the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it's important because you can't just take a story from one place. If it's echoed by thousands of years later on another culture and it's the same story, then you gotta start paying attention to it.
Skeptic society over here. What if it is just a, first source had a bad whisper down the lane and the next source is just follow that whisper and follow it somewhat closely?
Except that we have about 4 different sets of tablets. There's even one called the Legend of Itsubar. I'm sure no one's ever even heard of. That's the same thing again.
Okay.
And so George Smith realized that in his books. And he realized that all these stories of the flood were the same event told by different cultures.
And George Smith is 1800s guy.
He's the guy that cracked the code of the Sumerians.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so in the Atra-Hasis, Enki, again, the patron Sumerian god of Eridu, is supposed to have this pact that they're not supposed to war any humans, so he does it cleverly. Again, they literally had a pact, like, we, the great Anuna, had an agreement. This is what it says. We, the great Anuma, had a plan, and you broke that plan. A man survived, blah, blah. That's what it says. Enki says he did it because Ziusudra was his bloodline son, because Enki had slept with women. Mm-hmm. And their bloodlines were like, they had gifts and powers.
Half holy.
Yeah, so they were trying to wipe them out and clean the slate. That's essentially what it was.
Oh, they're trying to wipe out that blood. Oh.
They were trying to wipe out, they called them abominations, because they were like half god, half gods.
But they called them abominations?
Later on they did. They ended up being hunted down.
But they're supposedly more powerful.
We're going off on a whole thing, but we can go down and talk about the sons of Anak another day.
Pull us, if you want to pull us back, pull us back.
I will for a second. I just want to say there ended up being a later time period where they were hunted down.
Okay.
And then the last of that group was known as the sons of Anak. And they were in the area that it relates to the story of Moses. It's not the story we know. If you read Deuteronomy and a book of Numbers, it's like, I wish people would read their own books. It's like insane to me. It comes right from there. It talks about how Moses was commanded to destroy the bloodlines of the giants of sons of Anak, and that he conquered 60 walled cities.
60 walled cities?
I'm not joking.
Is that like
castles?
Oh.
To kill, it says, and then he was ordered to kill every woman, child, and person in these places to wipe out their bloodlines.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's insane. Guys, if you're religious, please read your own books. Deuteronomy and Book of Numbers, guys. Anyway.
Yeah, they are. Look, the Bible is a vicious book.
Yes.
It is
Old and New Testament. Okay, so in the Atra-Hasis, I don't want to lose track too far.
Yes.
Enki secretly warns Ziusudra because he says that it was his bloodline. That's why. That it was like his son, almost like one of his ancestral sons. Okay? He instructs him to use what's called bitumen, which is so bizarre because we use bitumen in all kinds of construction operations and building today. But he knew about bitumen so far back that it brings up questions like, how could they possibly have known about bitumen? Do you know what bitumen is?
Nope.
It's a combination of different things that create like a type of adhesive that is the toughest thing you can in the world. It's what they use
for... What does it use? Yeah.
Basically, they use it to blacken out and seal things so that nothing can get in. It's almost like a tar. So he commands him, he has to build something to survive what's coming. That really is true. He tells him he must build with cedar planks because cedar planks are the only thing that'll survive this type of event. And it's just funny because I'm a farmer, believe it or not. I grow vegetables. I grow vegetables. I love growing crops. Vegetables.
You do a lot of shit, man.
And I had to build raised beds for gardening. And in building raised beds, you find that if you use the wrong type of wood, it rots like right away. And it doesn't do anything. And so what you find is by far the most high quality thing that exists for wood is cedar. It's like a super wood. It never rots. And so they had the cedar growing there, and he commanded him, he's like, the only way you will survive this event is if you do exactly what I tell you. This is what's so wild about it. This can't be just nothing. It's a real being talking to him. He says, build it exactly these dimensions. Seal it with bitumen like the darkness or something, like basically the absolute, he says. No light can get in. He's anticipating an event that's so crazy that it's like everywhere. It's above, it's below. They have to like isolate themselves in something. That's what he's talking about.
Okay. I'm tying this to something you said. Go ahead.
Okay, so he tells them very detailed descriptions on how he has to build something to survive a coming event, and that he has to bring his entire family and then just his local animals. So that's where they manipulated the whole thing into like a stupid story later.
Remind me the approximation of how many years back we are with this.
That's the hardest thing. We know it's not right before the Younger Dryas. And that's what the hardest thing I've come to realize is that
So it could be way back.
this is like 50,000 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but
Or maybe older, like
you
maybe
know what
100,000 years ago. I know I'm like gonna lose people. It could even be older than that. I know
what-
that's insane, but
you know what theme I was tying it to my head? Because I figured it was unrelated. I figured this was on a way different timeline. But when you were talking about like, it's getting all mixed up right now. But I think it was Göbekli Tepe.
yeah,
Where they had the stone that could close in
yeah,
above,
the Baron
like they were
Kuyu.
going into a bunker.
Yes,
This is a very similar theme.
it is because they later had to do that to survive. Because not every event was the same. Some events were different than others. It had to do with the interaction of the Earth with different things. But this event in particular was related to more of a catastrophic flood, and it's always called that, the Great Deluge. Now, I don't believe it was based on rain entirely. I think it was based on like a tsunami. Because look at Eridu's got seashells on top of it. Persian Gulf is right there.
Yes.
It makes more sense that we had tectonic movements and enormous amounts of water. Now, where are we in that region? If you go look at a map, we have the Black Sea right above it, and we have the Persian Gulf right below it, and then the Mediterranean on the other side. If you were to get a massive influx of water, all three of those water bodies would flood.
So I just type in, can I do Black Sea? Is that good enough for you?
And then just zoom out.
Yeah.
So here we are. Here's Iraq, and here's Iraq right there. I can't talk and point at the same time, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's good.
And then here's Eastern Turkey. Now notice it's surrounded by massive inland lakes and different things like that. I think that's why that region talks about the flood so much. Because I think what we saw is that
the lakes are the result of the flood.
combination of a lot of different things. But we're talking about what it states is that there was so much water that's why there was 45 feet of sediment on Çavuştepe. Because if you go across an arid land with a massive event like this, that arid land is not going to have a lot of vegetation, and it's going to pull all its material with it. It's called sedimentation. Okay? And so that's what we're talking about here is that so Enki tells him how he has to build this craft that is the only way that they're going to survive. And he tells him he has to survive. He tells him that it's like critical for humanity.
Yeah, but he's also like giving him the keys ahead of time as to how to.
But if it wasn't up to him,
he needs.
Enlil, his half brother, the eagle, he's the serpent. He wanted all of humanity wiped out.
Have you? Now I'm getting mixed up in my head as to what we talked about off camera versus on camera. So just because we're on camera, I want to make sure. Have you gone through the eagle serpent thing today on camera?
No, not with you.
Not on camera.
No.
All right, so can you do that now? If you're going to say that.
Okay. We won't go too far, but because we got to get back to this, we Julia just scratched the surface.
And what part did we leave off to?
The end of the Atra-Hasis.
End of the Atra-Hasis. Okay, go ahead on the eagle serpent.
I do love how talk about rabbit holes we're going down. One of the things that I did get known for in my last book, The Stage of Time, not the one that I'm releasing with Billy Carson, Epic of Humanity, but right before, and I did include some of that in there, but my previous book called The Stage of Time, one of the core concepts in there I talk about a lot is that I realized that there seemed to be a competition with civilizations all throughout history with certain symbolism. And the symbolism seemed to be shared, that it goes all the way back to these Anuna gods, because they seem to represent themselves with very specific symbols. Now, I thought it was fascinating because remember I showed you that mural where they're passing the knowledge of the...
Yes.
There's other murals that depict them, but with an eagle head.
Well, there was an eagle on the top of
No,
it,
but yeah, but this is different, with an eagle head. Like their mentality.
Yes.
And what they were passing wasn't the same thing. I've come to the conclusion that what they were passing, because they were depicting that, they never do anything by accident. They were depicting the knowledge of war. and about how to create a different kind of civilization. Because what we find out is that Enlil had a son named Ninurta. Ninurta is the same person who became Nimrod in the Bible and is also the same individual that became the Byzantine eagle of the Roman Empire. There are these powerful influences we seem to be able to trace around the world of these specific mentalities, and it can't be a random coincidence because there ended up being this almost war against the two. And we know that especially with the Americas. Now, in the Americas, I want everybody to wrap their head around to think that there was a much older version of those civilizations there than we're taught. Like, for instance, the Aztec that were practicing blood sacrifice and the Maya that were doing all that, that's not part of the group I'm talking about. That was, again, a later iteration of those regions that had no one guiding them and sort of went on like a chaotic place evidence shows that they were in extreme drought for like 500 years, and they were getting to such extreme aspects that they were sacrificing people because they didn't know what to do. They still had the knowledge that the gods played a role in the world and them, but they didn't understand, so they started like freaking out because they were all dying out, and so they started sacrificing like 1,000 people a week. I'm not even kidding; it was horrible. They didn't know what to do, but what historians don't tell you is that and I'm not saying this was justified at all, but they were in such an extreme drought that their maize crops, corn, were all failing, and they had nothing to eat. So they were trying. Anyway, that's a long rant, but I have to always say that because whenever I talk about the cultures of the Americas, everybody's always like, well, how can they be so good if they're doing all that? And that's what I need to like lay down, is that the original Maya, the original Olmec, the original pre-Aztec, the Toltec, the ones who created Teotihuacan, Tenochtitlan, created Chichen Itza, those are part of an ancient story that directly relates back to Sumer. And the idea is that there were these great sages, and it gets back to the story of the Dogon. There were these great sages.
One in Africa and Mali, we talked about it already.
That are described as traveling like around the world and creating civilizations. But those original sages were part of that Enki side with the knowledge of creating temples and higher consciousness. But the other side with Enlil and Ninurta, they didn't find any value in that. They didn't want that to be part of any of our structure of us. And that's where this competition began, is how do you rule humanity? Do you rule humanity through an iron fist and being a war empire and disciplined? Or do you rule humanity through like ancient temples and being creative and like showing all those aspects? And that was what this great division became, because
left and right side of the brain,
right? And that's what it is. The eagle represents the left side of the brain mentality, and the serpent and dragon represent the right. And the right brain has always been associated with the divine feminine and creation. Always.
So, and that's what's interesting there, because the serpent, like, I'm very good friends with Paul Rosalie. Love him. Paul, you do amazing work. I don't fuck with snakes, though, right? Like, that guy fucking loves snakes
not
and everything.
real snakes, though.
I understand,
Okay.
but, like, you know where my head goes.
Okay.
I think serpent, I think literally, devilish shit, right?
Yeah.
What you seem to be saying is that it's the other way around.
They ended up inverting almost every symbol after around the Holy Roman Empire period. That's where I've traced it. Is that people don't know is that the Roman Empire used to be a non-monotheistic civilization, meaning that they didn't believe in a single god. That's called monotheistic religion. Romans used to believe in the planets being gods, and they used to worship them. Okay, and they believed in like more of the old ways, blah, blah, blah. But the point was that when the Roman Empire was collapsing, there was a man named Constantine. And Constantine ended up having this brilliant idea where they would restructure the Roman Empire. In where? Istanbul, Turkey.
Son of a bitch.
That's where it started, was Istanbul with Constantine. That's why it was called Constantinople.
Constantinople, yeah.
Constantinople, thank you. And so Constantine was brilliant. He's like, okay, so how do we control everything? And they were like, well, if we rewrite history, we can write the future too, because who controls the past controls the future. And then they also realized, well, we can't really have people like reaching higher states of consciousness through spirituality and through these teachings, so let's also take over religion. And then we can have the trifecta of what was supposed to be is in that mural, remember? The priest and the king. It's exactly what they did. They created that in a completely different way. And what they did was they then turned into a monotheistic religion. And instead, then they started like persecuting anyone that wasn't a Christian, remember?
Yes, and this is what happens with
And then the Christian wars took off.
Yes.
But then what they did was interesting is then they burned the Library of Alexandria. And then what they did is they went around the world and systematically destroyed all the ancient groups that were pre-Christian, such as the Gnostics. And that's the entire reason why the Dogon ended up in Mali. Because Egypt was under religious persecution from not only the Romans, but other groups. It was like
they went, okay.
There was a war over the ancient ways versus the new ways of thinking. And so the Roman Empire, the Crusades by the Christian Empire, was not about just converting people to Christianity, but it was about literally destroying any echoes of the past. Yeah. And so to this day, we don't know how many ancient things were really destroyed.
See, this is where I always say this, and I don't attack organized religion. I think most of the people who have organized religion as a big part of their life use it for all the right reasons, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's a personal thing. And so I think it gets aggressive to do that. But for whatever reason, and it was heavier in the older times. I think today it's lighter for the most part because of civilization moving forward with
more
some things.
Acceptable and everything.
But, there's that back 10% of people who just use religion for power.
Yeah.
And they ruin it for everyone else. And it just, every time you learn about it in history, you just get frustrated because it just repeats itself over and over again.
Yes.
But anyway, so thank you for the context.
But I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because without that religious context, now it makes more sense to people maybe why Eridu is treated the way it is.
And I do just want to say as a note for the people listening right now, I can tell looking at the clock, we're in the second podcast, so I want to say something I said in the first podcast just for context, but there are times today, again, where I'm stopping you on some things to define stuff.
Yeah.
And there are people out there who are experts on this stuff, listen to a lot of it, who are going to be like, God damn it, I already know this. But for the people who aren't listening, I'm doing that. So my apologies if I'm cutting Matt off sometimes to make sure we go through some things. But you and I did talk about that ahead of time.
Yeah. And
so you were at, and I made a note of this, you were at where the end of the Atra-Hasis.
Hold on. Before we do that, I just want to summarize up what we were just saying.
Okay.
In the knowledge of what I just said, what we find is that there were civilizations that were emerging in the Americas that just sort of came out of nowhere. Graham Hancock talks about this all the time with the Olmec, how the Olmec are this incredibly mysterious group that seems to have African origins, and yet we're told that the only migratory patterns of ancient people came from through the Bering Strait. So there's already the Olmec, because they were practicing rubber extraction, which came from Africa, and they looked at very African-like features, as well as other things. It's what we're seeing is an entire narrative and story that's different than we've been told. And what that is that, and I want to just lay this out there, the Maya state that their great sage or teacher that taught them everything, who created their civilization, his name was called Kukulkan, okay? Now, Kukulkan was shown as what's called a feathered dragon. It's not really that. It's a symbol. But remember, getting back to Enki, Enki's symbol was the dragon and the serpent. It was his symbol. It goes all the way back in the Garden of Eden, where the serpent tempted Eve. That's him. That's just written from that perspective, because Enki he's Prometheus. He gave fire to humans. He's the reason why we all the forbidden things that we became was him. And he became demonized of the greatest degree. He became this Satan demon figure. Okay? Because, remember I told you they assumed roles in different parts of reality?
Yes.
He ended up going in the underworld, alongside his negative counterpart known as Nergal. Now, people don't know this. Now, remember law of correspondence? They were obsessed with it. You remember what the law of correspondence is?
No.
As above, so below. And what that means is not just the stars and Earth as a plane, but realms of reality, meaning that there are like above dimensions and like lower dimensions, and third dimension, our reality is like sandwiched in between. We're almost like in between different realms of reality. And so he's described as going to rule in the underworld alongside Nergal, a very evil, wicked war god, to be a positive counterpart. And then in the above is a negative Enlil, who's a war god, and his positive counterpart, known as Thoth, or there's various names, but it's like it's exactly paralleled. A negative and a positive and a positive and a negative. That's what they did. But what that also did was that he became his entire anything related to him, anything related to the serpent or the dragon became so demonized that it was like the ultimate sin. And that was why Eridu became completely abandoned. It's his patron city. But it's not the only reason, and there's others as well. That was his patron city.
And so you're just saying it all got flipped on its head.
Yeah.
On
Now,
purpose.
let's get back to the Americas.
Okay.
In the Americas, the Maya created all these civilizations, and they say that they're serpent feather god, right? And feathers just mean ascension to a higher form.
And where were the Maya relative to modern day geography? Where were they located?
Great question. You mean historically, like what time frame?
Well, both the time frame and also what countries that we now know.
So what we find is the Maya really were like the domain of the Yucatan of Mexico, and the Olmec were more like the Veracruz aspect of Mexico, sort of southwest towards.
Got it.
Yeah. Now, so Kukulkan is supposedly this great leader, sage that taught them how to build temples to the stars, and then taught them everything and left. And then you find that the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl is the exact same thing. It's the same feathered serpent god, supposedly teaching them everything and then leaving. Then you find out Viracocha to the Inca, it was a feathered serpent god who taught them everything and then left. It's like at some point you find out they're all the same person. So Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, and Viracocha, they're all the same. And you find out that they were just the same influences all around the world. Now, this is what the point I'm trying to make with this is, it was all influenced by the same person, a feathered serpent god, teaching them about higher knowledge of consciousness and everything. Then they end up changing the name of it to reference that. So we were told that Americas, North and South America, is named after the Italian explorer, but it's not. It's named after Amaruca, which is the original name that the indigenous people call the region.
How do you know that?
Because they have it, they talk about it all the time. It's like it's well known in South America, especially Peru and Bolivia.
But is it just ancient? Is it like, ancient rumor? People just like to say that, or is there actually evidence to support
There are
that?
depictions of Viracocha from ancient times, and that have the alternate name in the region of Amaruca, and it's very well known for those who study down in that region that Amaruca became America, and what it means the land of the feathered serpents. That's what it means. And Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, and Viracocha is because that was their symbol. They weren't really dragons, but it was their symbol, and then they moved on. Now, this is where I just want to quickly segue back to this. So think about them as the serpent dragon civilizations, okay? Now think about Columbus, Cortez, and Pizarro. All conquered systematically north to south in the Americas from the Spanish Empire that had the eagle on its crest, just so you know, who sent Columbus to what's the United States now, like the Bahamas area, who, by the way, and I don't want to go on a segue on Columbus, but oh my God, if people knew the truth about Columbus,
horrible guy.
What he actually did was take slavery in Portugal and the Dominican Republic to mine gold. And they went back and forth for gold. There was nothing about spices or a trade. The whole thing was a lie.
I know people get on everything as woke rewriting of history, but the fact that we still have a fucking day after that guy is a disgrace.
Yeah, he basically just took slaves and went back and forth and mined gold, just if you want to summarize it.
He was a terrible human being.
So he conquers that area, and then what happens is Cortez comes right after him and conquers all of Mexico and the Aztec. And the only reason he was able to do that...
They thought he was a god.
They thought he was returning Quetzalcoatl on the exact anniversary that the ancient people had believed, which means that the Catholic Church knew about that.
What?
It means that the Catholic Church, who was the one who sent him, the Spanish Catholic Church,
knew about what the Aztecs over there even were and were thinking.
That's the only reason they sent him, because they knew that.
What did they do? Have a spy undercover there?
If he went there, the Aztec had 200,000 warriors. He went over with 110 men.
Yes, but he also...
They're saying what happened, I'll tell you the story. I mean, he arrived on the shores of Veracruz, Mexico.
Yeah, they thought
he comes in with horses and all this armor, and he actually told them that he was Quetzalcoatl. And they were like,
How do we know that?
because they said to him, "Are you Quetzalcoatl?"
He just said,
said
yes.
yes.
That's not that hard, though.
Okay, but-
he could just be like, yeah, sure, call me that.
But he came at the exact time that Quetzalcoatl was supposed to return as a prophecy from thousands of years ago.
Now, I understand that would be a fucking unbelievable coincidence.
The year he's supposed to return.
But how would they have known that where he came from?
Because they'd already been there.
Do we have any evidence of that?
But my theory is that the church and the power of those empires, we don't really, I think they knew more than we know. They knew about these old ancient gods. They knew about some of this, and it was only kept, though, in the highest priesthood and the highest echelons.
And you might be right. You may very well be right there. But how that was...
Because they knew that there was tons of gold. Because
but we're also talking about the same people who, and at this point it was past that point, but like they thought they were, fucking traveling to India when they first...
I don't think that the story of them saying he was looking for a spice tree is right at all. I think that's a front. What I think that makes the most sense is because they knew how much gold was in specifically South America. Most of the gold is around Cusco and Peru area, but there is gold in Mexico, and there is gold in, especially like Columbus found it in the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico.
Okay, so they knew it by the time Cortez got there in 15-something. They knew it based on the previous expeditions that there was reasonable evidence that there was a fuck ton of gold.
And they probably also knew that there was a prophecy of the return of Quetzalcoatl from already visiting and learning about that, is what I imagine.
Uh-huh.
How else could they have known all those resources are there? Because they ended up finding what was at the time the greatest catch of gold on Earth. Peru was the richest area of gold on the planet, and it wasn't until South Africa they discovered the massive reserves of gold under South Africa that they found other places. But Peru had absolutely incredible wealth of gold. I mean, so much gold that the ancient El Dorado myth. Cusco was that place, and when they first arrived in Cusco, it literally had gold. Just was things were like not. I'm trying to say paved in gold, but they were like covered in gold.
You called it a myth, though.
Well, because they never were able to prove what El Dorado is.
I know, but like Francisco, I'm obsessed with El Dorado. Francisco de Orellana.
Yeah.
I mean, he reported what he reported.
Oh, I know, and because
down.
It's in the thing. I think the reason there's like a complication in that story is because they stole it all. And so the story is that, and I don't want to go too far offhand, but Cortez lands in Mexico, pretends he's Quetzalcoatl, captures Moctezuma, their leader. This is how it went. This is the only reason they defeated them. I don't know if you know this story. He captures Moctezuma, holds him for rancid. Then, of course, all the people realize he's not really Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah, and then they all got sick, too.
No, well, yeah, but then he executes.
Oh, yeah.
He kills Moctezuma, their leader, and then he subsequently goes to the Aztec at the time were living on an island called in Lake Texcoco. And they were living on an island that only had land bridges across it. It was this huge lake that's shallow. It's where today Mexico City is. And so what they did was they closed off the access and exit points to the civilization on the island and starved everybody to death. And made everybody have no water, and they all died. Literally, they caused a starvation and death. I think it's reported to be 100,000 people in Tenochtitlan. So that was how they conquered the Aztec, was being very, very clever, because they knew that in open battle they would have lost. So they went to battle after the people in Tenochtitlan were all dying of thirst and hunger. Then they charged in with horses and armor and then just killed everybody.
And at this point, did they have more than 110 men?
No.
They were still...
I think it was 146, if I remember correctly. And they lost like 2.
How long from arrival to starved them all out and came in and killed the rest?
I think it was a couple of years. But I mean, what we're talking about here is imagine an army of 140 or so people on horseback killing like 75,000 soldiers or 100,000 soldiers. They describe them as cutting them down like cattle, like farm animals.
Now, relative to a lot of the stuff we're speaking about today, this is not that long ago.
No.
This is like 500 years.
It's the reason I'm saying all this is that then right after that occurred, Pizarro conquered South America with the Inca. Same thing. They captured their leader, Atahualpa, held him a ransom for gold, but this time he said, because they knew the gold all came from there, he told them he wanted to fill an entire room with gold. Like tons of gold. And they had it. And they knew it because of Cusco. So, but they couldn't invade Cusco yet because it was still being run by the Inca.
Wait. Hold on. You lost me for a second. I'm keeping it all straight.
Someone saw Cusco. Somebody they were exploring South America. I don't think it was Pizarro. I think it was one of his scouts on a mountain saw Cusco and saw all the gold. And then reported back to him. And then they're so smart. They knew, just like Cortez knew, that there's no way they could have conquered the entire Inca. They were just a massive army. So they captured the leader, pretending they're going to go be in talks, held him ransom for all the gold, and then killed him. Problem was that Atahualpa was the last of the royal bloodlines of the Inca. And when he died, the entire Inca Empire went into chaos. So then they stormed Cusco and stole all the gold. And they came back with thousands of bullion, tons of bullion.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.